Well, let me give
Okay.
our introduction to our guest expert and then we'll get into the session. So I just want to say
Yeah.
hi to everybody and welcome to today's education session in the Empowered Endings Foundation. This is Navigating the Parkinson's Journey with Dignity and Support with Jo Rosen. Jo is the founder and president of the Neuro Wellness Foundation, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to improving the quality of life for individuals and families navigating the Parkinson's and other neurological conditions. Jo is here to share her wisdom, compassion, and her expertise. So we just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and we're really excited to learn from you. Of
I thank you so much for the invitation to come on this morning and
course.
also to tell our audience, which is far and far beyond anything that we know, anything that I can share that will help with navigating the journey of Parkinson's and even some other related neurological disorders. One of the reasons the subject is so deeply, it matters so deeply to me is that Parkinson's doesn't just affect a diagnosis and it doesn't just affect one person. It affects relationships, identity, families, emotions, caregiving, and the way that people experience their daily life. So for more than 34 years, I worked closely with individuals and family navigating Parkinson's over time, and I began to realize that there was something that was very important. While tremendous focus was being placed on the diagnosis itself, medications, and treatment, far less attention was being given to the emotional journey that families and caregivers were experiencing every single day. In many ways, the pendulum had swung heavily toward the medical side of care, while the human side, the caregiving, the emotional support, the isolation, the confusion, the exhaustion, and the need for connection often wasn't being addressed adequately. That realization became one of the driving forces behind the founding of the Neuro Wellness Foundation. And so we wanted to create something that focused not only on education, but also on emotional wellness, practical resources, trusted support, and helping individuals and families feel less alone while navigating neurological conditions. Because education matters, resources matter, support matters, and human connection definitely matters. Now, just a little personal side of why I got involved so much 36 years ago is that my mother was diagnosed. And notice I said she was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And a few years later, my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so when Alan was diagnosed, it was like, oh my gosh, maybe I need to know something here. For mother, I just thought everything that was going on with her was a symptom of old age because mothers or parents seem always older than their kids, right? So you just say old age. And now we're there, right? It's like, oh my God. But really, that's what just thought every time I saw a mother that her conditions, what she was exhibiting was because of her age. And then when Alan was diagnosed, I thought, it's not, it's that may not be the case here. So with that was when I started my investigation to see what was available in knowing about Parkinson's and how to care for somebody with Parkinson's. And I learned a tremendous amount in those 34 years. And now I'm at 36 years. So, and I'm learning more. The Neuro Wellness Foundation, just for your information, covers currently 4 neurological conditions. Parkinson's is our first one because that's where my knowledge base is, my major knowledge base. Alzheimer's is my second one, multiple sclerosis, the third one, and autism is the fourth one. Now, as we grow, we can continue the spectrum of neurological disorders. But what's amazing to me so far is that I'm finding that there is such tremendous connectivity between the 4 that we already chose to be working on. I'm going to think that we're going to find those connections through all of the neurological disorders that we bring to the forefront and start educating about. I find that amazing. But for today, we're going to cover Parkinson's and that navigation. I know we already have one question is how it's diagnosed. Well, sometimes it's diagnosed poorly. And when I say that, sometimes it's diagnosed by a doctor who says, I think you may have Parkinson's, go see a neurologist. And then they either send you to a neurologist or you find your own neurologist and you go. This could be a general neurologist who knows little about Parkinson's or little about any specific neurological disorder. So we want to make sure that if Parkinson's is the diagnosis, that we go to the right neurologist. And the right neurologist in this case would be a movement disorder specialist. That's a specialty that's over and above general neurology. So what happens when someone actually gets the first diagnosis from the first doctor who says, I think you might have Parkinson's? And they may have heard, I think you may have Parkinson's, you may have Parkinsonism, you may have Parkinson's-like, you may have atypical Parkinson's. They didn't hear all those other words. All they heard was Parkinson's, and they more than likely heard the word disease, because oftentimes it is not just said in the medical profession as Parkinson's, it is said as Parkinson's disease. And that word disease can be very off-putting, and it can also create tremendous fear and tremendous uncertainty. And just the person being diagnosed is just overcome with this. And then the family becomes sort of the same way, unless they can individualize it and say, this is really now a whole new issue for me to look into, to examine, to research, and find out everything that I can know. Another reason that you would really want to get to the movement disorder specialist is that I will say to you, and I said it already, that there were words that may have been used in the diagnosis that you didn't hear, like Parkinsonism or atypical or Parkinson's-like or Parkinson's syndrome. If you missed those words, then you miss something that's very critical, because there are 20 to 30 diseases that mimic Parkinson's but are not. And the reason that it would be important to know whether you have one of those Parkinsonisms, I'm going to call them, is that typically the medication for generic Parkinson's disease does not work well, if at all, with the Parkinsonisms. But the medical profession currently has no other way of treating other than the medications that have been there for 200 years. Well, maybe not that many years. The disease itself is 200 years, but the oldest medication for this is a little over 50 years old. And that's the one that is generically today called carbidopa levodopa. Or in the old days, before it lost its patent, it was called Cinemet. But today, it is still the gold standard for people diagnosed with Parkinson's or Parkinsonisms. And so that's probably the first bit of information that you'd want to know about what to do when one is diagnosed with Parkinson's. Let's fast forward a few years, and let me say to you that my mother is now gone. My husband is now gone. With mother leaving the world, our family, I knew about it. I learned about it in the 34 years that I was doing the Parkinson's work, that the only way to really find out if someone has Parkinson's or a Parkinsonism or Parkinson's-like is through a neuropathological autopsy. And fortunately, gave our mother's brain to research. And through that, we received the neuropathological autopsy and discovered she did not have Parkinson's. So she lived with that diagnosis for 8 years. And what we discovered after the autopsy was that she had progressive supranuclear palsy. And you don't need to know exactly what that is today, but it's a couple of words that you might want to put into your background, into your computer bank, if you will, as something to learn about or know about. So and then, as I said, advancing some years later, I now have a brother that's diagnosed with Parkinson's. So we have to ask, is there a genetic component here, or is there something else? And no one really knows the answer to that today either, even though this disease was named over 200 years ago. So we've advanced a lot in the medication drive and the research and scientific drive behind the disease. However, we still haven't got the knowledge of what causes it, what cures it. There is no cure. and we don't know how to fix it, except that we do know how to slow its progression as much as possible. And that slowing the progression primarily is through exercise. But it takes more than exercise. Like any other condition that we might be diagnosed with, Parkinson's is just part of the whole body transaction, and the entire body needs to be concerned with and concerned about in order to make life and to create the greatest quality of life possible while living with something like Parkinson's disease. So what do we think about when someone is diagnosed with Parkinson's? I just talked to you about the uncertainty of it, the invisible symptoms of it. Now, because I have the personal experience of having lived with one person with Parkinson's, you would think I would know tremendous amount about how people feel about Parkinson's. Good morning. And the answer is I don't, because I just know about one person with Parkinson's, or my mother. I just know about one person and how that person felt. Parkinson's, it affects everybody very differently. And this is not like unlike any other disease or any other condition. Everybody, even a cold or the flu, affects people very differently from one to another. And so when you were looking at research, when we're reading a book, when we're even listening to experts, we must always remember that what we're talking about is pretty much a general idea. Some of the conditions or some of the symptoms that we're talking about are similar in a majority of the population of this in this disorder. However, everybody again is reacts very differently. They react differently to the medications, just like you would with any other disorder. You can take something specifically for a cold. It probably won't have anything that won't help you at all. Whereas another person can take an aspirin and their cold seems to go away in a day or so. So keeping that in mind, that everybody is very different. We can talk about the stresses that the diagnosis of a disease can cause, and we wonder if it's being caused primarily on the person that was diagnosed with it, or are there others around that have similar or even more stress? And I would suggest that it's the people around that have more stress about the fact that their loved one was diagnosed with something that they can't fix or that they don't know much about, rather than the person that was diagnosed with it. Most of us, when we're diagnosed with something, we take it's just another job for us. We have to deal with that in our life is so we were diagnosed with something. Yes, it's not nice and it's not good, but we'll get through this. And yet the people around us want to fix it and keep us as healthy as possible. So as we're going through the journey of any of these conditions, but particularly Parkinson's, it seems to be the caregivers and the families who are affected more with the stress related issues that come with dealing with anything. The person with the disease process might go through some isolation factors, and that would be because depending on the symptoms that show, they would probably be embarrassed if they, for instance, have a tremor, or if one of their feet is lagging when they walk and it's dragging along and it's making that noise, or if they've got some involuntary movement going on, that those symptoms may cause someone to feel insecure or self-conscious, and consequently may also start reducing the amount of socialization that they have going. Not necessarily a good thing, because we all need socialization, and we will find, and I think research will prove, that if a person stays exercised and socially in it, active as well, that the regression of the disease, if you will, is more apparent than if they start isolating themselves and start doing some inner talking. People that are in the family start changing roles. They start becoming the active. It's almost as if they become the active parent, if you will, and they're treating the person that's diagnosed with the condition as the child. Again, they want to fix this disease. They want to fix this person and make them happy And they want, and in doing so, they apply their own standards. And that's probably where the biggest bit of stress and fear comes in, is that we want that person to be like we want them to be, as opposed to how they can be or how they are. Acceptance is a very big and heavy word, and it has to be used on both sides of this, not only the person with the condition, but also with the family members. And so we're now just a little days into this, and I would want to know if any of you have any specific questions that you think you would like to have covered. And if not, I'll keep going. But do you want to ask Jess if they have questions? Somebody has a hand up. Dr. Stan, you have your hand up and I can see the hand, but I can't. If you unmute, I could hear you. Or if you feel more comfortable, put your question in the chat box and Jess can pay attention to it. And if that question comes in, Jess, please give me a high sign and we'll go for that question.
Absolutely. I was curious at the very beginning, you were talking about there's like a thread through all of the 4 different neurological conditions that you described, but I was wondering what is that thread through all 4 of those that you've seen, those connecting pieces?
Well, so one of them has to do with memory.
Okay.
One of them has to do with, yes, the cognitivity that's going on. So in Parkinson's, we have a cognition issue, particularly later on in the disease process. We There's something that can come with Parkinson's called Lewy body, which is a dementia. What I've discovered is there are many, many dementias. And so we have Alzheimer's, as one, and then we have Lewy body. Those two are probably the most talked about dementias that we have. At some point in the Neuro Wellness Foundation, we'll cover all of the dementias by name and what the differences are within them. But the one thing that we find is cognition. Another thing that we find are that there are typically going to be 5 stages, and so in Parkinson's we call them the Hone and Yar stages. However, they appear to be like life stages and disease process stages. And so we seem to find the same stages, at least in 3 of them: MS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Those stages are pretty much similar. It'll be interesting to me to continue examining and researching that to find out what other similarities there are between these diseases. And this is where I think we need a no bound or no borders research situation going on, so that we're not just looking at one specific neurological condition. We're looking at many of them because many of them are so similar. That was a really good question, Jess. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and Joanne asked if you could repeat the stages, what they're called.
So can everyone see my screen? And if you can, then you can see
Mhm.
the 5 stages that Hone and Yar consider the Parkinson stages. We have stage 1, where it looks as normal, perhaps, as you and I, but maybe one of the major things that we would notice if we had an eye tuned to that, we would notice that when this person walks, that they probably are not swinging both arms, that one arm is hanging pretty still. And that's one of the symptoms of that they use for Parkinson's. But you notice the person is walking and standing pretty tall. The person at stage 1 may also have a tremor. We'll go into some of those in a minute. Then we'll go to stage 2, and you notice that the person's posture is changing a bit. And now we're getting a little off balance. And when I say off balance, this is one of the stages where a person needs to concentrate and think about the exercises that they're doing, the balance exercises, the postural exercises, and of course the lung exercises. So those are aerobic. We want to make sure that the lungs stay strong through this whole process, because they are so much of what we need, including breathing and the breathing that we do. And I think until just recently, I personally had no idea of how important the lungs were until I had my own condition in the cardiac world. And now I can tell you, I know that how important the lungs are and the breathing process is. So in stage 3, you notice that this person is now they're having mobilization issues or mobility issues. And so they're walking with a cane. And in stage 4, they've now moved to walking with a cane. With the cane, they're still probably independent and could be living by themselves if they were someone that was living independently by themselves. But by stage 4, that person should no longer be living by themselves because the balance is at issue. The walker comes into play, and there are other issues happening that the slowness of movement is increased tremendously. And so stage 4 becomes one where we start thinking about bringing in people to help with monitoring and with managing the condition. By stage 5 is the condition where the person with the condition is pretty much wheelchair bound, and they're on their way to being bed bound. Wheelchair and bed bound kind of go hand in hand, because if they can't walk, if they cannot get out of bed, then they need someone to help them get there. And then they're moved around by way of a wheelchair. So if we scroll down, and this happens to be in a book, and I'll give you the name of the book in a minute, but I a book that I authored that takes the family or the person with the condition from diagnosis through the end of life on the most experiential way that I could possibly give to somebody, so that they could follow what I actually experienced and what I know so many others have. But here are the symptoms and the stages. Common early signals include tremor. However, tremor doesn't necessarily mean that you have Parkinson's. Tremor can be attributed to other conditions as well. But there's tremor, there's twitching or the rolling of fingers. There's foggy thinking or brain fog. There's smaller handwriting that we call micrographia. There's REM sleep disorder or vivid dreams. Those are very interesting. My husband had the vivid dreams, and so for the partner, it can be dangerous living in bed. My Alan happened to like sports, so at one point he used my head as the basketball, and he was bouncing the basketball on my head. So you can, he also loved baseball, and so one night he was running into first base and he went off the end of the bed. And so the vivid dreams are definitely there. I know my brother, that's one of the issues that he talked about in newly onto his diagnosis. So the loss of smell is something that we think about, because that seems to go. And of course, with the loss of smell, also then becomes the loss of taste. The drooping shoulder we talked about, or the arm that doesn't swing while we're walking. The difficulty walking or the stooped posture, and that comes in time, as we talked about. Trouble rising from a chair. Now that, and getting in and out of a car also would be one of those challenges. Constipation. Oh my gosh. And you asked, Jess, what is one of the commonalities of the conditions? Constipation is there throughout all 4 of them. One of the early things. So if a person is constipated, they shouldn't necessarily be thinking of neurological conditions, but constipation is obviously an issue where bacteria is being created and not moving through the system like it should. So if someone is constipated and listening, please pay attention to it. Reduced facial expressions, and that's very critical in the Parkinson's world, because we normally, as time goes on, find the person has no facial expression. And so those of us who are used to seeing them smile, all of a sudden we're not seeing that smile happen, and we're wondering, is there something wrong? Why aren't you smiling? When in fact it happens to be a symptom, and the muscles and the nerves that are necessary to making a smile isn't there. Falling backwards can be a symptom, and a very frightening symptom as well. Soft or slurred speech. This is such a critical place to think about and talk about, because as the disease progresses, the volume of the voice gets smaller and lower and shorter. And it's critical that someone think about the speech exercises that are specifically made for people with Parkinson's, and start getting involved with those practices early on in the diagnosis. The soft and slurred speech becomes very difficult for the family and caregiver to understand as time goes by. And so if you don't want to get involved in the practicing of speech and how to articulate and keep the slurred speech away, then think about some device that you could use where the device can speak for you. And at this point, there are some, just because of how we've gone forward in with AI and with other technological aspects, but there are things that are available to help us in understanding soft and slurred speech, but it is nowhere near as good as if the person that develops that can practice in advance and try to avert it. Double vision is also a big symptom in many people with Parkinson's. And that's when we think about, I suggested early on that someone sees a movement disorder specialist. One of the things that we want to think about early on is that Parkinson's is a movement disorder. Everything that moves in our body eventually gets slowed and stops moving. And so if we start from the top of our head and we get to the eyes move. I don't know how many times during the course of the day for a so-called normal person. But with Parkinson's, the blinking slows down, so dry eyes become an issue. The saccading back and forth, the eyes don't saccade or move as easily as someone without the condition. And so double vision then happens because the muscles in the eyes are not functioning the way that they should. So consequently, the vision becomes doubled and blurred and many other things. So we talk about exercising the eyes as much as we talk about exercising the rest of the body. Symptoms often begin on one side of the body. As the disease progresses, coordination, movement, and speech may become more and more noticeably affected. And as I said earlier on, tremor isn't always Parkinson's. Tremor can also result from multiple sclerosis, encephalitis, medication side effects, anxiety, or alcohol use. Parkinson's tremor typically appears when the body is at rest and often starts in one limb or the jaw. Stress can intensify it. So those are just 2 pages in the book that I would now like to share with you. The name of the book is For All of Us, Understanding Parkinson's Together. I actually wrote this book when my brother was diagnosed with the disease, and my niece called and said, "Auntie Jo, I don't know anything about Parkinson's, and I don't know what to tell my children, and they are so concerned about their papa." And I said, let me see if I can put something together to help them understand and take the fear out of it. And fortunately for the world, that became For All of Us. And I have heard from numerous people that it is a really good guide for anyone that is in want of or needs that guide to go through. And if you go to our website, which is neurowellnessfoundation.org, you may find that book on the website. I'm pretty sure that it's there. If it's not there right now, it will be there within the next month. And for a donation of $50 to our organization, I will actually autograph that book and mail it out to you personally. So if you want it, please get in touch through our website, and we're happy to help you with that. So let's move on then. Unless there are any other questions or someone wants to know something, I'm happy to answer questions. So we talk about emotional wellness, caregiving. We talked about caregivers need time on their own. So the person with the condition must really understand that the person that's caring for them is taking on more than a double load. They're not only taking on the purpose that they have to make you or keep you as well as possible, they're also taking on jobs that you may have had that you may not be able to be doing anymore, or in time may not be able to do. I swear, sharing the information is critical in the beginning of these relationships with a condition like this. Because at one point, there is no doubt that the person with the condition can no longer handle the critical issues that they once did. Take that into the finance area. Generally speaking, the caregiver knows nothing about the finances because the person with the condition was the person who, they just happened to be A-type personalities that seem to be getting these conditions. So they're the ones who normally took care of the finances and took care of everything. And now the caregiver is there saying, my gosh, What do I do now? How do I reconcile a bank account? How do I deal with the stockbroker? How do I deal with, refinancing the house? Or where do I find money? Or how, all of those things come to issue. So share it and find out and work on what the final, where is this going with you and how can you help one another get there? Purpose is so important. It's why I do what I do. It is my purpose to continue doing the best that I can. So we talked about the 5 stages, and now because Empowered Endings has given me this opportunity to speak to you, I need to tell you that the role that they play in our world is so critical because, and I said this last night at a get together that a function that I was at, is that death and dying becomes a critical part of life. And we should continually remember that birth and death need to be acknowledged, probably one as much as the other. So we always acknowledge birth and we're excited about birth and there's a newness to birth, but there's also an enjoyment in letting go. So in getting to that point of letting go, one of the areas that I work on as much as I can is telling people to have those critical conversations. I was very fortunate to be married to a man we had our conversations were very open and we talked about death and dying and living through to the end. And one of the things we asked about was where do you want to die and how do you want to die? Now, that wasn't just my question to him. That was his question to me, because what we seem to think is that because someone was diagnosed with a condition, that they're going to die first. And that's not necessarily the case. So we have to make sure that we ask these questions fairly of all parties involved. So fortunately, my husband said that he wanted to die at home and he wanted to die in bed next to me. And so we laughed about it because I said, then you cannot die when I'm on the road, because I was doing a lot of traveling. And he said, but you can't die when you're on the road either. So the answer was we knew how and when, how and where we wanted to go. And that was just a big discussion to have, because it gave both of us freedom of knowing how to honor that person at the end of their life. These things can be done through their doulas, the end of life doulas they are called, and I'm sincerely believe that Empowered Endings will have at least 1 or 2 end of life doulas on to talk about what their role is in this. Then we have the financial experts that can talk about the authorities that are given in the financial area to the family members that need to be involved. And then we also need to discuss, what if the person with the condition doesn't have a family or a family member, and what do they do? All of those are issues and discussions that I have with people. They're not all appropriate for today. We don't have enough time to cover them all today, but they need to be thought about and also mentioned or brought up, so that the fear of leaving this world becomes less of a fear and more of a joy of getting to the end. If we have our house in order, then all we have to do is live. If we have our finances in order, if we have our wills and trust in order, if we know how and when we want to die, or how and where we want to die, if we want to know what we want our last ceremonies to be like. And those are important discussions, and we're not leaving anything to burden someone else. I think about that for myself all the time, and I've had those discussions, and I even have a portion of it in writing, so that now that I'm alone, I don't want my niece and nephew to have to be burdened with what do I want to have done with my body? Do I want to be buried? Do I want to be cremated? Do I want to give my body to science? Another wonderful idea. And we cannot forget that our body is very useful in the science area. And by giving our bodies to science, as I said to you early on, with my mother having the autopsy and discovering that she did not have Parkinson's, she had progressive supranuclear palsy. Who would have known that had we not donated her tissue to research? And so research becomes an idea for us to think about and to execute and act upon as well. So reducing the diagnosis to a livable situation is where we intend to go, to bring about the greatest quality of life possible while living with it. knowing that almost every person that you know and that I know dies of something. And I am here to actually ask you to tell your family members that if you are the one with the condition of Parkinson's, that you have on your death certificate that you died of Parkinson's. And the argument is, but I didn't. I mean, I died of something else. Nobody dies from Parkinson's. Well, the way that Parkinson's get counted in federal funding in particular is by way of death certificates. So if you die of pneumonia, then the federal government puts a check mark at pneumonia, and pneumonia gets some funding. But if you die of Parkinson's, then Parkinson's gets some federal funding. So just keep remembering that. It's not about the argument whether you die of or with or for or from or whatever Parkinson's. You're dying. What is the best benefit that you can do? And if you have a condition like Parkinson's, I think that your best benefit is to have on your death certificate that you died of Parkinson's so that you're counted. There is no other way in the world right now that we could actually tell you how many people have Parkinson's, because we don't have a count for that. But if everybody puts on their death certificate that they had Parkinson's when they did, then we will have a better count of how many, at least, that we knew of in the past had Parkinson's. So we've now covered a big gambit of from diagnosis through death. And there's an awful lot in between there to cover. And I am happy to discuss that with you. So if you have questions that you would like today, please raise your hand or unmute and ask your question. Okay. So Joanne, did you have a question? You started out early on that you had a question.
This was fabulous information, and I, my colleague and we had never heard about the death certificate. Makes all kinds of sense. I work with caregivers with dementia. Same thing with Alzheimer's, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes.
And let me ask you, if you see someone with those first stages, the benign tremors and maybe some facial, how likely is it that they might progress into Parkinson's? Or can you just stay at stage one?
Well, at stage one, you're great. You should have a diagnosis of something that's either um, at that point, the neurologist or the movement disorder specialist would be saying you have Parkinson's or you have a Parkinson's-like situation. In any case, Joanne, they're going to progress. If any of those words are used, they're going to progress through those 5 stages. I don't know anyone yet who hasn't gone through the stages. Just don't. And maybe I haven't been at this long enough, but 36 years, you would think that I would know somebody who was diagnosed with Parkinson's who really, well, and I can say that, yes, just to clarify that, if they had a heart attack and died of the heart attack, they obviously didn't go through the stages. But otherwise, if they've gone through the generic stages of Parkinson's, they go through all 5, and it does progress. But the speed at which they progress becomes another really important factor, and that's in the knowing whether or not they have Parkinson's or Parkinson's-like, because there is a disease called multiple system atrophy that is Parkinson's on speed. So someone with Parkinson's, I know someone right now who's had Parkinson's for 30 years, and she's still doing extraordinarily well. And yet I know people who have gone from diagnosis through death within 8 years. And they've had all of the and that typically is MSA. Now, Mother went through 8 years as well. But now we know much more about progressive supranuclear palsy than we did back in 1992. And so I'm guessing that those diseases, the ones that mimic Parkinson's, have a much longer period of time that someone lives with it than they used to. So Parkinson's used to be, if you got to 15 years, that was really terrific. And today we know many, many people who are well into their 30 years of having Parkinson's. Another thing that I may have forgotten to say today is that we think that Parkinson's is an old person's disease, and it's not. And I've got articles on our website that address young people with all of these diseases or these conditions. MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, none of those 3 are necessarily old person's diseases or old person's conditions. The youngest person with MS and with Parkinson's, I think, as 2 years old, 2 or 4
Wow.
years old. And I knew someone who was 7, and I work with many youngsters. And when I say youngsters, they're in their 20s and 30s who were diagnosed with Parkinson's. So you wonder, is it because it's happening more often? Is it because what's causing this? Is it because we're hearing about it more frequently because of the fact that we have news coming at us in seconds instead of in a week or a day or whatever time it took a newspaper to get to your house, or whatever time, once a day you got the news, but you only got so much news. What is it that are we hearing about Parkinson's and these other conditions so much sooner than before? I don't know. And then we also don't know whether the environment just has something to do with this. So there's a lot of knowledge still needs to be built around it. But as long as we know that Parkinson's isn't just an old person's condition, it affects the young as well. Good questions. Thank you.
This is Janice, and I'm
Hi.
pleased to be a bystander and listen to this conversation. My husband has been diagnosed with a benign essential tremor. So, some of the diagnostic characteristics he has, and some he does not. Do you have any information about linking the two, or?
And typically, they are not linked together, and I know many people with essential tremor. And all of the people that I know in the 36 years I've been doing this, I don't know of one that has gone to the Parkinson's level. I will say that research is out there that says it can or it does. I haven't experienced that. And
Okay.
so I think that someone with benign essential tremor, if they can deal with the tremor, if it's not advanced to the where it's not creating a lack of quality of life, then live with it, kind of thing. But other than that, there are things that can be done for essential tremor to remove it, if you will, or to at least stop it for the time being. And the biggest one out there right now is focused ultrasound.
Mhm.
And that's a non-invasive procedure that is used. It's used in Parkinson's as well, as is deep brain stimulation. I think
Right.
it's probably going to be used more in essential tremor than DBS is, but it's something to keep in the back in your computer bank so that if it ever gets to the point where he can't deal with the tremor, then he can do something like that.
Okay.
How is it affecting him?
I feel like he is getting to be he's a very outgoing person, but getting to be more reserved, withdrawn.
Reclusive. Yeah.
Mhm.
Tell him he's not his tremor. He is still the same
Right.
old Joe, and I don't mean Joe in whether that's his name or not, but he's still the
Right.
same guy that he used to be, and that
Yes.
tremor is not him.
Yeah.
So, but educating himself about it, and I'm so happy that you're in today's conversation. But it's also educating others. It's the one thing that I think relieved Alan, my late husband, from the stresses of having Parkinson's when he said, "Please don't tell anybody. You can't tell anybody." And I said, "Sorry, I already did." But he said, "No, no, no." And finally I said, it seems to me that if you talked about it, it would relieve a lot of the stress and the pressure that you're feeling of having this condition that has a name. I mean, it doesn't
Right.
make you, it has a name and it's something you have to deal with. And I think that if you learn about it and then you tell the world how they can be helped by it, whatever you learned or found, first of all, it gives you a purpose. And secondarily, it empowers you to go through with just a complete different mindset on how to care for yourself and how to become the warrior, if you will.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Warren is a delightful man, but his tremor's very you can't hide a tremor that, he's, has pretty advanced. And so,
So there again, then we start thinking about what is it that we can do for him that might make his life live with greater quality. So I'm sure already that you must have heard about the spoon that's on what do they call
it's a, yeah,
starts with a G, whatever it is, but so that the spoon doesn't shake. Even though he shakes, the spoon stays still. So that's one thing that you can find that probably on Amazon, but if you go online and be careful in going online, but you
yeah,
can find those spoons and you can find utensils that are specifically used for people with tremors for drinking out of and eating. And yes, so probably your best project for you to do in your research is to look for products that are available. And I will say to you, it's an invitation that if you find something that you think works, let me know what it is. And I will share that information with the world, because that's what we do, is trying to create the greatest quality of life possible. We want to know what that is so we can share it with others.
Thank you.
You can give your husband the project. Tell him, Jo Rosen wants to know who you are. She wants to hear about the products that work for you.
You would love
Yeah,
knowing this man, actually. He's just everybody's best friend.
that is neat. Neat to hear. Okay.
Thanks for
And
your great information.
you're welcome. So, Jess, is there anything else that you'd like me to talk about today? We could go on and on. We could take one of these pieces of this and have an hour about it.
Yeah.
So I trust I've covered everything that I could that would be helpful. I'm happy to do it again, covering a particular subject if you want. But Neuro Wellness Foundation is there. And along with our partner, if you will, Empowered Endings, we are here to help the world and to help educate and to bring about the greatest quality of life possible as we go through it. It's all I've done for a majority of my life at this point. And it is my purpose, and it is my prayer that I do the best job possible so that I can affect more people with quality of life.
Yeah, I really feel the passion coming through. I hear the purpose, of course, and see the purpose like lived out in everything you've built and everything you're going to continue to build. But the passion is here and it comes through so clearly. So we just really, really, really appreciate all the time and information
Thank
you
you.
shared with us today. I'll be sure to put your book, as I wrote it down. I want to put that into our resource library. I feel like you covered everything we wanted to talk about today. I've learned so much. I really appreciate you.
I'm so
Thank you very
glad.
much.
Regarding the book, just a quick one. The book is being put into ePublic, so that on our website, and I can share a link with you as well,
Okay,
Jess, that
perfect.
when we get it to that point, they can purchase it from almost any place,
Oh, cool.
and it will be less expensive than what I talked about today. I said for $50, and that's the donation today.
Yeah.
The book itself, if printed, is really a $25 book. Just all the costs that are involved in it. I had no idea when I started this, because I didn't know it was going to be a book, that it was really costly to put a book together. So just making sure that the organization doesn't suffer from handing books out. We do it for a fee.
Totally smart. We totally get it too.
I just wanted to say thank you for a great presentation. It was very enjoyable, and I loved all the little personal stories. Really helps. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, the personal stories, there are bunches of them. And this is what getting into a community like this does, is sharing those stories. Not only does it make us feel less alone, we just know we're not alone. And the enjoyment of somebody else's story or listening to a sad story might give us the idea that we should really be doing or thinking about doing something else. When we talked about those discussions at the end of life, those actually shouldn't be done just at the end of life. You take a young couple who has children, etc., and they need to have these discussions. And what are we going to do with the children if something happens to us? And how do you want that to be? You don't want your parents to have, well, get that out of the way, and get it accomplished, and then live.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate you, Joe.
I'm
And
delighted that I had the opportunity. So thank you.